At my wedding, my 3-year-old grandson grabbed my hand and whispered, "Grandpa, Mommy cries a lot. She has hurt Mommy many times." I looked at my future wife smiling in front of everyone, but something inside me started to feel wrong. I didn't say a word. I quietly took the tablet my grandson gave me and opened the video on it. What I saw made me realize that the people I trusted most had been hiding a terrible secret from me for a long time. Welcome to Dad's Revenge Stories. I'm so grateful you're here. Where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Also note, this story contains fictional elements for entertainment and learning. Any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental, but the life lessons are entirely worth it. I have built things my whole life. I built my first business with $23 and a handshake from a man who believed in me before I believed in myself. I built Harlan Estate brick by brick over 40 years, walking those grounds so many times that I knew which floorboard creaked near the library door and which window let in the cold when the Tennessee wind blew hard from the north. I built a family. I raised a daughter. I buried a wife. And on the morning of November 15th, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom and believed with everything I had left that I was about to build something new. My reflection looked back at me, a man of 65 in a charcoal suit, silver at his temples, hands that had known hard work and harder grief. I straightened my tie for the third time. Outside, I could hear the florists arranging the last of the white roses along the chapel walkway. I could hear car doors closing, voices greeting each other across the long driveway, the soft tuning of string instruments somewhere beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the garden. 400 people had come to Harlan Estate that morning. Business partners, old friends, neighbors who had watched me grow from a young man with dirt on his boots into whatever it was I had become. They had all come to see me married. I told myself I deserved this. That was what my brother Bobby had said the night before, clapping me on the shoulder with that big hand of his. "George," he had said, "you have given this family everything you had. It is time somebody gave something back to you." I had laughed and told him he was getting sentimental in his old age. He had laughed too. That was the last easy moment I remember from that morning. I was walking down the main hallway toward the chapel entrance when I felt a small pressure at the side of my hand. Not a tug exactly. More like the way a sparrow lands on a fence post. Gentle, uncertain. I looked down. Cody was standing beside me in his little navy suit, the one his mother Emily had pressed the night before. He was 3 years old and barely reached my hip. His dark hair was combed flat in a way that would not last another 10 minutes. He was looking up at me with his grandmother Margaret's eyes wide and brown and serious in a way that no 3-year-old's eyes had any right to be. "Hey, buddy," I said, crouching down so we were level. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" He did not answer right away. He looked down the hallway toward the garden entrance, then back at me. His small hands twisted the hem of his jacket. "Grandpa," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mommy cries a lot." I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain yet. More like the feeling before pain when your body knows something is coming before your mind catches up. "She does." I kept my voice soft. "What do you mean she cries a lot?" Cody's bottom lip pushed forward. He was working hard to find the words the way small children do when they are carrying something too heavy for their size. "At nighttime," he said, "when she thinks I am sleeping. But I hear her." He pressed one hand flat against his chest over his heart. "It hurts in here, Grandpa. Mommy says that is where sad lives." My throat tightened. I reached out and straightened the collar of his jacket just to have something to do with my hands. Shudia. I said carefully, "Did something happen to make Mommy sad?" He nodded, fast and certain the way children nod when they have been holding something in and are finally allowed to let it go. "Miss Diane," he said, "she hurts Mommy. Every time you go away, she hurts Mommy and makes her cry. Then she smiles again when you come back." The hallway felt like it tilted. I stayed crouched down in front of him. I could hear my own heartbeat. Behind me, somewhere near the chapel, the string quartet had begun to play something slow and sweet that I had chosen myself 3 weeks ago because Margaret had loved it. The music floated down the hallway and wrapped around us both, and I thought absurdly that it sounded like a farewell. "Miss Diane," I repeated. My voice came out steady. "I do not know how." Cody nodded again. Then he reached into the small pocket of his jacket. The pocket I had not even noticed had something in it, and pulled out a tablet. Emily's tablet. He held it up to me with both hands, the way a child offers a drawing he is proud of. "I made a video," he said simply. "By accident. But Grandpa, I think the people in it are talking about you." I took the tablet from his hands. My fingers were steady. My chest was not. From somewhere behind me I heard footsteps on the marble floor, measured, deliberate. I recognized them without turning around. Sarah Briggs had worked in this house for 20 years, and her footsteps had a particular sound, the sound of a woman who moved with purpose and never wasted a step. "Mr. Harlan?" she said quietly. She stopped just behind my shoulder. I could feel her standing there, waiting. I looked at the tablet in my hands. Then I looked at Cody, who was watching me with those serious brown eyes, his little jacket already coming untucked at one side. I pulled him into my arms and held him for a moment. He smelled like the lavender soap Emily always used for his bath. He patted my back twice the way he had seen adults do because he was 3 years old, and he understood comfort even if he did not understand everything else. "Thank you, buddy," I said into his hair. "Grandpa is going to take care of this." I stood up. I handed the tablet to Sarah without a word. She took it without a word. Down at the end of the hallway, through the tall glass doors, I could see the chapel entrance. The white roses, the guests filing in, and Diane standing just outside the chapel door in her ivory dress, laughing at something a guest had said, her hand resting lightly on the man's arm. She looked radiant. She looked exactly like the woman I had believed she was. I watched her for 10 seconds. Then I turned to Sarah. "Get Bobby," I said. "Get Marcus, and get Dr. Peter." I kept my voice low and even. "Tell them to meet me in the security office in 5 minutes. Tell them to come quietly." Sarah did not ask a single question. That was why I trusted her. "Yes, sir," she said. I looked at Cody one last time. He was watching me with his grandmother's eyes. I turned and walked toward the chapel with my shoulders straight and my face arranged into the expression of a man who had not just had the floor pulled out from under him. 400 people were waiting. The music was still playing. And somewhere in the pocket of my suit jacket, I had already made a decision that would change every life inside that building before the morning was done. Walking toward the chapel, I kept my face forward, and my steps measured the way my father had taught me to walk into a room when everything inside you is falling apart. George, he used to say, "A man can be bleeding from the inside and nobody needs to know it until he decides to let them." I had always thought that was wisdom. Standing in that hallway with Cody's words still ringing in my ears, I was no longer sure it was not just a different kind of loneliness. My mind went somewhere else entirely. It did that sometimes pulled me backward when the present became too heavy to carry straight. And right then, it pulled me all the way back to 1984. I was 24 years old, and I had exactly $23 in my wallet, a second-hand truck with a cracked windshield, and an idea that everyone I knew thought was foolish. I wanted to build something, not just a business, a place, something that would still be standing long after I was gone. Margaret had believed me when nobody else did. She was 22 when we met, working the front desk of a small hotel in downtown Nashville. She had red hair and green eyes and a laugh that filled whatever room she was standing in. On our third date, I told her my plan, all of it, the whole impossible dream, and she listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Well, I suppose somebody has to do it. It might as well be you." We got married 6 months later in a small church outside of town. Bobby was my best man. Margaret's mother cried through the entire ceremony. We had $400 between us and more joy than I have ever felt since. The first 10 years were hard in ways that are difficult to explain to people who have not built something from nothing. There were months when payroll was a prayer. There were winters when Margaret and I sat at the kitchen table after Emily went to bed and went through the numbers together, line by line, her hand on top of mine, her voice steady even when the numbers were not. She never once told me to quit. She never once made me feel like failure was something she was afraid of. "We are in this together, George Harlan," she would say. "All the way to the end." Emily was born in the spring of 1991. I remember standing in the hospital corridor at 2 in the morning, too shaky to sit down until the nurse came out and told me I had a daughter. I pressed my back against that cold wall and covered my face with both hands and cried in a way I had not cried since my father's funeral. Margaret named her. I would have named her anything Margaret wanted. We built Harlan Estate the year Emily turned 7. I remember the day we walked through the finished main house for the first time, just the three of us, footsteps echoing on floors that still smelled like fresh wood and paint. Emily ran ahead, her voice bouncing off every wall, calling out the name of each room like she was claiming territory. Margaret walked beside me and slipped her hand into mine. "We did it," she said quietly. "You did it," I told her. "I just did the heavy lifting." She laughed and bumped her shoulder against mine. That was Margaret. She never needed credit. She just needed us. The good years stretched out long and golden after that. The business grew. Emily grew. Harlan Estate became something I had never quite imagined, not just a home, but a landmark, a place people knew by name across 3 states. I was proud, but the pride was always secondary to something quieter. Coming home at night to the sound of Margaret in the kitchen. Watching Emily do her homework at the big table in the library. Sunday mornings on the front porch with coffee and the newspaper and the particular silence of a house that is full of people you love. I did not know in those years that I was storing up everything I would need to survive what came later. Margaret was diagnosed in the fall of 2019, pancreatic cancer. The doctor was kind about it, which somehow made it worse. She had maybe 18 months, he said. She lasted 3 years through sheer stubbornness and what I can only describe as a refusal to leave before she was ready. She spent those years doing exactly what she wanted: her garden, her books, her grandchildren, when Emily's boy Cody arrived in the summer of 2021. She held Cody for the first time and looked up at me over his small dark head with tears running straight down her face. "George," she said, "look what we made. Look at all of it." She passed on a Tuesday morning in October of 2022. I was holding her hand. Bobby was in the chair by the window. Emily was in the doorway with Cody on her hip, and he was too young to understand, but he was quiet the way children sometimes go quiet when something large and invisible moves through a room. After the funeral, after everyone went home, I sat alone in our bedroom for a long time. The house was the loudest it had ever been, and it had never been so completely silent. I was 64 years old, and for the first time since I was 24, I did not know what I was building toward. That was the man Diane Mercer found when she walked into my life 5 months later. Not the builder, not the patriarch. Just a man sitting in a quiet house, missing his wife, and dangerously willing to believe that warmth, when it arrived, was the same thing as truth. I understand now what I did not understand then. Grief makes you hungry for comfort in ways that are hard to explain to someone who has not felt it. And there are people in this world who know how to feed that hunger, not to nourish you, but to empty you. I kept walking toward the chapel. Bobby called it a charity dinner. I called it the longest evening of my recent life, because in the 5 months since Margaret passed, every social event felt like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else, familiar in shape, but wrong in every way that mattered. I had gone because Bobby had asked 3 times, and I had run out of reasons to say no. That did not sound like a man who had given up on the world entirely. The dinner was held at the Vanderbilt Club on a Thursday evening in March. Round tables with white linen, a string quartet playing in the corner. 200 people in their finest clothes raising money for the Children's Hospital, which was a good cause, and I reminded myself of that fact every 20 minutes to keep from leaving early. Bobby found me at the bar around 8 o'clock, a bourbon in each hand, grinning the way he always grinned when he had done something he considered clever. "There is someone I want you to meet," he said, pressing one of the bourbons into my hand. "Bobby," I said, "I came here to write a check, not to meet people." "You can do both." He was already steering me by the elbow. "Her name is Diane Mercer. She lost her husband about 2 years ago. Harold, I think. Good man from what I understand. She has been doing charity work around Nashville since she moved here from Atlanta. I think you would enjoy talking to her." I started to tell him that I would not enjoy talking to anyone, but we had already arrived. Diane Mercer was standing near the window with a glass of white wine, wearing a dark blue dress that was elegant without trying too hard. She was perhaps 50, with dark hair swept back from her face and sharp, intelligent eyes that found mine the moment Bobby said her name. She smiled, not the wide, performed smile of someone working a room, but something quieter and more considered, as though she had decided in the half-second, before it appeared, exactly how much warmth to offer. "George Harlan," she said, extending her hand. "Bobby has told me about you. All of it good, I promise." "Then he left out the interesting parts," I said. She laughed. It was a good laugh, genuine, I thought. I noticed the thought even as I was having it, the fact that I was evaluating the laugh, and I told myself that was just grief making me cautious. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked about the hotel business with real curiosity, not the polite surface curiosity of someone filling time. She had opinions about architecture and about Nashville's growth over the past decade. She mentioned her late husband only once briefly and did not linger on it, which I appreciated more than I could say, because I was not yet able to talk about Margaret without my voice doing things I could not control. When the dinner ended, she shook my hand again at the door. "It was a genuine pleasure, Mr. Harlan," she said. "George," I told her. She smiled again. "George." Bobby was insufferable on the drive home. "Well," he said before I had even closed the car door. "She seems like a good person," I said carefully. "She is sharp as a tack and easy on the eyes, and she laughed at 2 of your jokes that were not actually funny, which tells me she has patience." Bobby merged onto the highway with the confidence of a man who had already decided how this story ended. "I am just saying." "You are always just saying," I told him. "It is your primary occupation." But I thought about her on the drive home. I thought about the way she had listened, really listened, not just waited for her turn to speak. Margaret had listened that way. I told myself that was a common quality in good people and meant nothing in particular. I called Diane 3 days later. I told myself I was being polite. We had coffee the following week at a place on Fifth Avenue, she suggested. Then dinner 2 weeks after that. By April, she had been to Harlan Estate twice for Sunday afternoon gatherings with Bobby and a few old friends, and everyone seemed to like her. And she was warm with the staff in a way that felt natural. And I told myself I was simply enjoying the company of someone who understood loss. What I did not see, what I was not looking for, because grief had narrowed my vision down to the immediate comfort in front of me, was the thing that happened every single time I turned away. Sarah told me about it much later. How Diane's expression changed the moment my back was turned. How the warmth drained out of her face like water out of a glass, replaced by something flat and calculating. How she began, even in those early months, to ask questions, small, seemingly innocent questions, about the estate, about the business, about who handled what, and who had access to which accounts. Sarah had noticed. She had written it down in that small notebook of hers. I did not know about the notebook yet. What I knew was that Diane Mercer arrived in my life at the exact moment when I was most willing to believe that warmth was the same thing as love, and that a person who showed up consistently must have consistent reasons for doing so. I was 64 years old, and I had spent 40 years building things, and I had not yet learned that the most dangerous structures are the ones built by someone else around you while you are looking the other way. Somewhere in Atlanta, a man named Harold Mercer had learned that lesson before me. I did not know his name yet. I did not know his story. But it was already waiting for me, patient as winter, in an old newspaper folded in a storage room at the back of Harlan Estate. I poured Diane a glass of wine on her third visit and watched her laugh at something Bobby said, and felt for the first time since October something that resembled hope. That was the beginning of everything that went wrong. I want to tell you about my daughter. The way she actually was, not the way Trevor Holloway needed everyone to believe she had become. Emily Harlan was 31 years old when she met Trevor, and she was without question the sharpest person in whatever room she walked into. She had Margaret's green eyes and my stubbornness, and a mind that processed information the way a good engine processes fuel clean fast without waste. She had built her career from an entry-level analyst position at a commercial real estate firm into a director's role by the time she was 28. Her team adored her. Her clients trusted her. Her boss once told me at a Christmas party that Emily was the kind of person a company built its next decade around. That was the Emily I knew. That was the Emily I raised. Trevor Holloway walked into her life at a conference in Memphis in the spring of 2020. He was 35, well-dressed, good-looking, in a way that photographed well and wore thin in person. He had a firm handshake and a story about a startup he was building that changed details every time he told it. Emily brought him to Harlan Estate that summer, and I shook his hand and looked him in the eye and felt nothing I could name as wrong. That bothered me later, that I felt nothing. Margaret was still alive then, though already sick, and she watched Trevor across the dinner table that first evening with those green eyes of hers that missed nothing. Afterward, when we were alone in our bedroom, she said to me, "George, that young man has never built anything with his own hands." "He is an entrepreneur," I said. "He is still building." Said Margaret, which was her way of disagreeing without starting an argument. She never pushed. She just planted the seed and let me water it myself eventually. I did not water it fast enough. Emily and Trevor married in June of 2021, 3 months before Margaret passed. It was a beautiful wedding. Emily was radiant. Trevor cried during the vows, which I now understand was one of the finest performances of his life. I walked my daughter down the aisle and put her hand in his, and believed I was doing the best thing a father could do. Cody arrived in August of that same year. And for a while, a brief and ordinary while, things seemed fine. The trouble started quietly the way real trouble always does. Not with a confrontation or a dramatic scene, but with small absences. Emily stopped joining the weekly calls with her work team. Then she stopped going into the office on Thursdays. Then one Monday morning in July of 2023, she called me to say she was taking a leave of absence, indefinitely. "Trevor thinks I should focus on Cody," she said. Her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before, careful, like someone choosing each word from a list of approved options. "He says the commute is too hard, and Cody needs stability, and I have been tired lately anyway." "Emily," I said, "you love that job." "I love Cody more," she said. "This is the right decision for our family, Dad." I asked her 3 more questions. Each answer came back in that same careful, measured tone, like a script, like something rehearsed. I told myself she sounded tired. I told myself new motherhood was hard and marriages required compromise, and I was not in a position to judge the private decisions of 2 adults who knew their own life better than I did. I told myself all the reasonable things a father tells himself when he does not want to believe that something is wrong with his child. What I did not know then was what was happening on Trevor's side of those conversations. Sarah pieced it together for me later, from things Emily eventually told her in the kitchen during quiet afternoons when Trevor was out. Trevor had begun months before that phone call a careful and systematic campaign to convince Emily that her job was making her unwell. He told her she seemed anxious on workdays. He told her her boss did not appreciate her the way she deserved. He told her in that gentle and concerned voice he used when he wanted something that real success was not a title on a business card, but a happy home and a healthy child. He said it so many times and in so many different ways that Emily began to hear it in her own voice. That was the part that frightened me most when I finally understood it. Not that Trevor had lied to her, but that he had been patient enough and consistent enough that she began to lie to herself on his behalf. Cutting Emily off from her income was not kindness. It was architecture. He was building walls around her, one reasonable-sounding brick at a time, and by the time she realized she was inside something she had not chosen, the walls were already above her head. I did not see it happening. I was watching Diane arrive in my life and feeling something I mistook for healing, and I was not watching my daughter closely enough. That is the truth I have had to carry since November, and I do not expect to put it down anytime soon. When I think of Trevor Holloway, I do not feel anger first. I feel the particular shame of a father who was present and still missed it. The anger comes after. It always does. But it comes. Sarah Briggs came to work at Harlan Estate in the summer of 2003, 3 weeks after our previous housekeeper retired. Margaret hired her on the spot after a 15-minute interview, which was unusual because Margaret was not a woman who made quick decisions about people. When I asked her about it that evening, she said, "That woman sees everything and says only what needs to be said. That is exactly what this house requires." 20 years later, I understood what Margaret had recognized in those 15 minutes. Sarah was not simply a housekeeper. She was the memory of Harlan Estate. She knew where every object belonged, remembered the names of every guest who had visited more than twice, and noticed changes in this house the way a doctor notices changes in a patient quietly, precisely, and without alarm until alarm became necessary. She noticed Diane in August of 2023. Sarah told me about it later after everything had come apart, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her voice steady in a way that told me she had been rehearsing how to say it for a long time. She walked me through it carefully, the way you walk someone through a dark room, making sure they do not trip on anything. The first thing she noticed was the smile. Secretary Harlan. Sarah told me, I have worked in this house for 20 years, and I have met a great many people. And I have never seen anyone switch expressions the way that woman could. You would turn around, and she would be laughing, and the second your back was to her, it was gone. Not faded. Gone. Like a light somebody flipped off. I asked her when she first saw it happen. The second week of August, she said. You had gone to the study to take a phone call. Miss Diane was in the sunroom with Miss Emily. I was arranging flowers in the hallway. I could see them through the doorway. Sarah pressed her lips together before continuing. The moment you left the room, she leaned toward Miss Emily and asked her about the estate accounts. Whether you had updated the beneficiaries on your insurance policies since Mrs. Margaret passed. Whether the business had a succession plan in writing. My stomach dropped when Sarah told me that. Because I remembered August. I remembered Diane being warm and easy that whole month, remembered her bringing iced tea out to the garden staff on hot afternoons. Remembered thinking how naturally she fit into the rhythm of Harlan Estate. I had seen none of what Sarah described. What did Emily say? I asked. Miss Emily said she did not know the details of your finances, Sarah told me. She said it in a very careful voice, the kind of voice a person uses when they are trying not to show they are frightened. I had to set my coffee cup down at that point because my hands had started doing something I could not afford to let Sarah see. The second thing Sarah noticed was what Diane did with information. Every conversation Diane had with the household staff, with the gardeners, the kitchen workers, the cleaning crew, circled back eventually to the same territory. Who managed what? Who had keys to which rooms? Which decisions required my signature, and which ones Diane might in time be able to handle on my behalf? She asked these questions pleasantly over coffee with the casual curiosity of a woman simply learning her new home. Nobody felt interrogated. That was the craftsmanship of it. She was building a map, Sarah told me, of everything you owned and everyone who helped you run it. I thought about the charity dinner in March, the way Diane had asked about the hotel business with what I took for genuine interest. I had found it flattering. A woman who wanted to understand what I had built. I had read it entirely wrong. She was not interested in what I had built. She was interested in what could be taken from it. Sarah, I said, why didn't you come to me sooner? She looked at me with those steady eyes of hers, and her answer was quiet and devastatingly honest. Because I did not have proof, Mr. Harlan. I had observations, and I have worked for wealthy families long enough to know that observations from the housekeeper about the man's new companion do not tend to end well for the housekeeper. She was right. I knew she was right the moment she said it, and that knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, because it meant that the very structure of this house, the hierarchy I had built, the authority I had established, had become one of the walls keeping the truth away from me. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I am sorry, I said, that you had to carry that alone. Sarah straightened in her chair. I was not entirely alone, she said. I started writing things down. Every date, every conversation, every expression I saw on that woman's face when you left a room. I have been writing it down since August of last year. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and placed a small notebook on the table between us. Navy blue cover spiral, bound the kind you buy at any drugstore in America. It was completely full. I looked at that notebook for a long moment. Then I looked at Sarah Briggs, who had worked in my house for 20 years and spent the last 15 months quietly, methodically doing the thing that I had failed to do. Thank you, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Mrs. Margaret would have done the same, Sarah said simply. She loved this family. I just tried to love it the way she taught me. I could not answer that. Some things sit too close to the bone for words. There is a photograph that used to hang at the top of the main staircase at Harlan Estate. Margaret and I on our wedding day, June of 1985. She is wearing her mother's dress taken in at the waist because she was smaller than her mother had been. I am wearing a suit that cost more than I could reasonably afford at the time, and grinning like a man who cannot believe his luck. We are standing on the steps of the church outside of town, squinting into the afternoon sun, and we look exactly like what we were, two young people who had no idea what was coming and were not afraid of it. That photograph hung at the top of those stairs for 38 years. I walked past it every single morning. I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the weight of a ring you have worn for decades. It was simply part of the house, part of what the house meant. In June of 2024, I walked up those stairs one morning and felt something wrong before I understood what it was. A difference in the light, maybe. A change in the weight of the air on that particular wall. I stopped and looked, and the photograph was gone. In its place was a large framed print of an abstract landscape in shades of gray and cream that Diane had purchased at a gallery in Green Hills 2 weeks earlier. It was an objectively beautiful piece of art. I stood there on the stairs for a long moment, looking at it. When I came downstairs, Diane was in the kitchen pouring coffee, and she smiled at me over her shoulder with that warm and practiced smile of hers. "Good morning, George. I hope you do not mind. I thought that hallway needed something a little more current." I put the old photo in a box in the storage room. I was going to have it properly framed as a gift for Emily, if you think she would like that. It was so reasonable. It was so thoughtful. I told her that sounded like a lovely idea and poured myself a cup of coffee and went to my study and did not think about it again for 3 months. That was how she worked. Not with force, but with reasonableness. Not by taking, but by replacing so gradually and so sensibly that you did not notice the original was gone until you were already living in the version she had built around you. Sarah told me later that it was not just the photograph on the stairs. Over the course of 3 months, Diane quietly removed or replaced 17 items from the main house photographs. A ceramic bowl Margaret had brought back from a trip to Vermont, the small framed needlepoint that Margaret's mother had made and given us as a wedding gift. Even the particular brand of coffee that Margaret had ordered from a small roaster in Chattanooga every month for 20 years. Diane replaced it with a French press and an expensive bag of beans from a boutique supplier in Nashville, which was very good coffee and which tasted nothing like home. I drank it every morning and did not notice what was missing. She presented it practically. It would simplify things, she said. No more transferring funds back and forth for groceries and maintenance and the dozens of small costs that came with running a property this size. It made sense. I trusted her. I said yes. I want to be clear about what a joint checking account means in practical terms, because I have since learned more about this than I ever wanted to know. When two people hold a joint account at an American bank, either party has full and legal access to withdraw any amount at any time without the other person's knowledge or consent. The bank has no obligation to notify the second account holder of withdrawals. It is a structure built entirely on trust. Diane understood this better than I did. She began withdrawing cash in amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts from the bank, never more than $4,000 in a single transaction, spread across different days, different branches on the rare occasions she used a teller. Sarah found a bank statement on the kitchen counter one morning in September that Diane had left there by mistake, and the number she saw made her go very still. She photographed it with her phone and added it to the record she had been keeping. Over 18 months, the total withdrawn from that account would reach just under $240,000. Transferred We later learned to an account in the name of a cousin in Baton Rouge, who was not to anyone's knowledge doing anything that required $240,000 in cash. That evening in June, when the photograph had been gone from the stairs for 2 weeks, and I had already stopped missing it, I came home late from a meeting to find Emily sitting with Cody on the back porch. The boy was asleep against her shoulder, his small face slack and peaceful, one hand clutching the collar of her shirt even in sleep. Emily was staring out at the garden with an expression I recognized, because I had seen it once before on Margaret's face near the end when she thought no one was watching. It was the expression of someone who had made peace with something they wished they did not have to accept. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, sitting down beside her. She turned and smiled at me, and the expression was gone so fast I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. "Hey, Dad. Long day." "Long enough," I said. I looked at Cody sleeping against her shoulder. "He worn you out?" She laughed softly and pressed her cheek against the top of his head. "He always wears me out. He is worth every minute of it." I put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small, and we sat there in the quiet of the garden while the Tennessee evening settled around us. I held my daughter and her sleeping son, and I told myself everything was fine. I was so determined to believe that. I cannot tell you how determined I was. Marcus Webb has worked security at Harlan Estate for 12 years, and in all that time, I have never once heard him raise his voice. He is a quiet man in the particular way that capable people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that information is more valuable than noise. He came to me from a career in federal law enforcement, and he brought with him a habit of observation so deeply ingrained that I sometimes thought he processed the world differently than other people did. Where most of us see events, Marcus sees patterns. Where most of us see people, Marcus sees behavior over time. He started noticing Trevor Holloway in the fall of 2023. It began with vehicles. Marcus kept a log of every car that approached the main gate of Harlan Estate, a standard security practice for a property of this size and value. In September of 2023, he noted a silver sedan that came to the gate 3 times in 2 weeks, always on weekday afternoons, when I was either in meetings or away from the property. The driver was a man Marcus did not recognize. Each time the man asked for Trevor. Each time Trevor came to the gate himself, rather than having Marcus escort the visitor inside, which was the established protocol for all guests. Marcus wrote it down. He did not say anything yet because he did not have anything to say. He had an observation, not a fact, and Marcus Webb did not deal in observations alone. The calls started coming to me in October. The first was from a man named Raymond Sutherland, who had been a business partner of mine for 11 years. We had done 3 commercial development deals together, and I trusted him the way you trust a man who has never once been less than straight with you. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and after the usual pleasantries, his voice shifted into a register I recognized as the one people use when they are embarrassed about something they should not have to be embarrassed about. "Gordon Coombe," he said, "I want to ask you about something directly, and I hope you will not take it the wrong way." "Raymond." I said, "In 11 years, you have never once needed to say that to me. Just ask." He paused. "A few months back, your son-in-law Trevor came to see me. He said he was looking to cover some short-term capital needs for a project he was developing. He mentioned that you were aware of the situation and supportive of it. I lent him $40,000 on the strength of our relationship and his assurance that you would stand behind it." I did not say anything for a moment. Outside my study window, the October light was coming through the trees in long gold strips, the way it does in Tennessee in the fall, and I watched it move on the floor while I absorbed what Raymond had just told me. "Raymond," I said carefully, I was not aware of any such arrangement. The silence on his end lasted 4 full seconds. "I see," he said. "That is what I was afraid of." After I hung up with Raymond, I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I called Marcus into my study and told him what I had just learned. Marcus listened without expression, which was his way of listening when something confirmed what he had already suspected. When I finished, he opened the notebook he always carried and showed me the log entries from September. The silver sedan, the gate visits, Trevor handling them personally. "How many times?" I asked. "That I logged," Marcus said, 11 times between September and the end of February. Different vehicles after November. Sometimes the same faces, sometimes new ones. I want to explain something about what Trevor was doing, because it matters to understand how it worked. When Trevor Holloway approached my business partners and associates, he never claimed I had signed anything. He never produced a document with my name on it. What he did was far simpler and far more difficult to defend against. He used proximity. He was George Harlan's son-in-law. He sat at my table at Thanksgiving. He was present at company dinners. He moved through my world with the ease of someone who belonged in it, and the people who knew me extended to him the same good faith they extended to me, because that is what trust looks like from the outside. What he did constitutes misrepresentation under American law, using false implications to obtain money from people who would not have provided it otherwise. It is fraud even when no document is forged, because the deception lies not in the paper, but in the impression deliberately created. My partners had no legal obligation to lend him anything. Their recourse, once they discovered the truth, would be civil suits against Trevor personally. I bore no legal liability, because I had signed nothing and authorized nothing. That knowledge did not make me feel better. Those were my people. Men and women who had trusted me for decades, and Trevor had walked through the door that trust opened and helped himself to whatever was inside. Marcus identified 3 partners who had been approached. The actual number, we later learned, was 7. "What do you want me to do, Mr. Harlan?" Marcus asked. I looked at him across my desk. 12 years this man had protected my home. He had never once asked me for anything beyond a fair wage and clear instructions. "Keep watching," I said. "Write everything down. Do not confront him and do not let him know you are watching. When the time comes, I want everything documented and I want it to be airtight." Marcus nodded once. "Yes, sir." He stood to leave. At the door he paused without turning around. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "in my experience, men like that one do not stop on their own. They stop when something stops them." He walked out and closed the door quietly behind him. I sat alone in my study while the gold Tennessee light faded from the floor, and I thought about what kind of man builds his life on the reputation of someone else, and what it said about me that I had let him get this close before I started to see it. Emily told me about the phone calls first, not right away. Not on the day everything came apart in the chapel. It was later, 3 weeks after, when we were sitting together in the library at Harlan Estate on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and Cody was asleep upstairs, and the house was finally starting to feel like itself again. She had a cup of tea she was not drinking, and she kept turning it in her hands, and I knew she was working up to something, the way I had always known, from the time she was 4 years old, when my daughter was carrying a weight she had not yet decided to put down. "Dad," she said finally, "I need to tell you some things about what it was like. I need you to understand that I tried." "I know you tried," I said. "No," she said, and her voice had a firmness in it that reminded me so sharply of Margaret that my chest ached with it. "You need to hear it. All of it. Because I need you to know I was not weak. I was not falling apart. I was trapped, and there is a difference, and it matters to me that you understand that difference. So I listened. I sat in that chair across from my daughter, and I listened to everything, and I want to tell you what she told me. Because it is the part of this story that I think about most even now. Trevor began isolating Emily from her friends systematically, the way you might approach any project that requires patience and incremental progress. He did not forbid her from seeing people. That would have been too obvious, too easy to identify and resist. Instead, he created friction. If Emily made plans with a friend, he would schedule something important for the same evening and express quiet disappointment when she chose to go anyway. If she spent an afternoon on the phone with someone from her old office, he would be withdrawn and distracted for the rest of the day. Not angry, just absent in a way that required repair. Over months, the friction accumulated. Emily found herself making fewer plans, not because she was forbidden to, but because the cost of making them had become exhausting. That is how it works. Not with locks and chains, but with the slow, steady taxation of your energy until you simply do not have enough left to spend on anything Trevor did not approve of. Then came the videos. In November of 2023, Emily went through a particularly hard 2 weeks. Cody was sick, Trevor was away more than usual, and she was running on almost no sleep in a house that felt increasingly like somewhere she was staying rather than somewhere she lived. There were 2 evenings when she lost control of her emotions, in the way that exhausted people do, crying in the kitchen, talking to herself in the hallway, sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning. Because it was the only room in the house with a lock on the door. Trevor filmed those moments. Emily did not know until months later when a college friend reached out to ask if she was all right. Because she had received a message from Trevor saying that Emily was struggling and asking people not to contact her as it was making things worse. The friend, confused and concerned, had forwarded the message to Emily directly. Emily confronted Trevor. He admitted it immediately without apology in the calm and reasonable tone he used for everything. "I was worried about you," he said. "I did not want people bothering you when you were not well. I was protecting you." What Trevor did has a name. It is called isolation by proxy, and it is a recognized form of psychological control in which one person manages the victim's social relationships on their behalf, presenting themselves as protective while systematically eliminating every avenue of outside support. It is not illegal in most American states unless accompanied by other forms of documented abuse, which is precisely why people who do it choose it. It leaves no bruises. It produces no evidence. It simply leaves the victim alone. Emily told me she had tried to reach me directly 3 times during that period. Once she used Sarah's phone while Trevor was out. Sarah handed it over without hesitation, but Diane was in the kitchen and heard the conversation and told Trevor that evening. The next morning, Trevor sat Emily down and explained very gently that involving the household staff in their private marriage was inappropriate and embarrassing. Emily did not try Sarah's phone again. "I wrote you a letter," Emily said, turning the teacup in her hands. "In January. I wrote it by hand, and I sealed it, and I put it in the mailbox at the end of the driveway myself." "I never received it," I said. "I know," she said. I figured that out eventually. She did not cry when she told me these things. She had already done her crying, I think, in all those months before anyone knew to come looking for her. What she had left was something harder and quieter than tears. The particular composure of someone who has survived something and is still working out what to do with the fact of having survived it. I reached across and put my hand over hers and stopped the turning of the cup. "Emily," I said, "I am so sorry. I was in this house and I did not see it, and I am sorry." She turned her hand over and gripped mine hard, the way Cody gripped things with her whole hand holding on. "You see it now?" she said. "That is what matters." I held on to my daughter's hand in the library of the house I had built, and outside the windows, the November light was thin and gold, and upstairs Cody slept without dreaming of any of it. And I thought about all the walls in a life that you cannot see until someone shows you where they are. The storage room at the back of Harlan Estate is not a place most people think about. It sits behind the laundry corridor past the door that guests never open in a part of the house that belongs entirely to the people who keep it running. Margaret used to call it the memory room because over 40 years it had accumulated the kind of objects that a family cannot bring itself to throw away, but has no immediate use for old Christmas decorations, boxes of books that did not fit the library shelves, furniture waiting for repairs that never quite rose to the top of the list. There were filing boxes along one wall containing household records going back to the early years of the estate. Receipts, maintenance logs, guest records, old issues of Tennessee and Southern Living magazines that Margaret had saved because she had liked a recipe or a garden idea and had meant to go back to them. Sarah went into the storage room on a Thursday morning in March of 2024 to locate records from a plumbing repair done in 2019 because a similar problem had developed in the East Wing, and she wanted the original contractor's information. She found the file she needed in the third box she opened. She was about to close the box when the edge of a folded newspaper caught her eye. It was a copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution from November of 2014. She could not have said afterward what made her pick it up. Curiosity, maybe, or the particular instinct of a woman who had spent 20 years paying attention to things other people overlooked. She unfolded it and scanned the front page. Then she turned to the local news section, and her eyes stopped moving. The headline read, "Prominent Atlanta developer dies suddenly at 71. Investigation ongoing." The man's name was Harold Mercer. Sarah stood in the storage room for a long time reading the article twice. Harold Mercer had been a well-regarded commercial property developer in Atlanta, a self-made man with a reputation for integrity that stretched back 30 years in the business community. He had remarried 14 months before his death after the passing of his first wife of 4 decades. His second wife, described in the article as a woman considerably younger than himself, who had been introduced to him through mutual friends, was named Diane. The article noted that Fulton County authorities had opened a preliminary inquiry into the circumstances of Harold's death, given that he had been in good health by all available accounts, and had updated his estate planning documents within 6 months of the marriage. The inquiry was later closed without charges filed due to insufficient evidence. The widow had cooperated fully with investigators and had subsequently relocated from Atlanta. Sarah sat down on a storage crate and read the article a third time. She was not a woman who jumped to conclusions. She had seen enough of life to know that coincidences existed, that grief took people to unexpected places, that a woman could be widowed twice, without there being anything more to it than the ordinary cruelty of fate. She knew all of that. She held all of that in mind as she sat in the storage room with the folded newspaper in her lap. And still, her hands were shaking. She took out her phone and photographed each page of the article carefully. Then she folded the newspaper exactly as she had found it, and placed it back in the box and closed the lid, and walked out of the storage room and down the hall to the kitchen, where she made herself a cup of coffee and stood at the counter drinking it and thinking about what to do next. She called Bobby Harlan that afternoon. I was not there for that conversation, but Bobby told me about it later, word for word, the way Bobby always recounted things with the particular precision of a man who understood that some conversations needed to be remembered accurately. He said Sarah's voice on the phone was steady, but that he could hear something underneath it the way you can hear a current beneath still water if you know to listen. She told him what she had found. She read him the headline and the key details. She told him about the name, the timeline, the second marriage, the inquiry, the relocation from Atlanta to Nashville. Bobby listened without speaking until she finished. Then he said, "Sarah, I need you to bring that newspaper to me, not a copy, the original." "I already photographed it," she said. "Good," Bobby said. "Bring both." They met the following Saturday at Bobby's house on the other side of Nashville, away from the estate. Bobby read the article 4 times. Then he set it on the coffee table between them and looked at Sarah and said what she had been thinking since the storage room, but had not yet allowed herself to say out loud. "This woman has done this before." Sarah pressed her hands flat against her knees. "We do not know that," she said carefully. "We know that her husband died. We know there was an inquiry. We know she moved here afterward. That is all we know for certain." Bobby looked at her. "How long has she been in George's house?" 14 months, Sarah said. Bobby picked up the article again. Harold Mercer had been married to Diane for 14 months when he died. Neither of them said anything for a long time after that. The Saturday afternoon light came through Bobby's windows and lay across the floor between them, and somewhere outside a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard, and the ordinary world continued doing what the ordinary world does while the two of them sat with the weight of what they now knew they were going to have to do. Sarah picked up her coffee cup. Her hands had stopped shaking. "We need more," she said. "Before we go to George, we need more than a newspaper." Bobby nodded slowly. "Then we find more." There was one more thing Sarah told me later about those 8 months between finding the newspaper and the morning of the wedding. She had tried once in April to speak to me directly. She had knocked on my study door on a Thursday evening when Diane was out. She had gotten as far as sitting down across from my desk and opening her mouth before we heard Diane's car in the driveway 40 minutes earlier than expected. Sarah had closed her notebook, excused herself, and spent the next 3 days watching Diane watch her with the particular attention of a woman who suspected something and was deciding what to do about it. After that, Sarah and Bobby moved more carefully. They were not slow. They were thorough. And thorough, when the stakes are this high, looks like patience from the outside. Emily told me this part on a different afternoon. It was a Sunday in December, 4 weeks after the chapel, and we were in the kitchen at Harlan Estate making the kind of simple dinner that neither of us was really hungry for, but that gave our hands something to do. Cody was at the table behind us, drawing trucks on the back of an envelope, narrating each one to himself in the running commentary that 3-year-olds maintain whether anyone is listening or not. The kitchen smelled like garlic and the particular warmth of a house that has been through something hard and is slowly finding its way back. Emily was chopping carrots. She stopped chopping without putting the knife down, and I recognized that pause because I had seen it before in the library 3 weeks earlier, right before she told me about the phone calls and the letter and the videos. "There is one more thing," she said. "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you this one." "Take your time," I said. She started chopping again. 3 cuts. Then she stopped again. "In January," she said, "I needed Cody's insurance documents. His pediatric coverage was up for renewal, and I needed the policy number off the original paperwork, which Trevor kept in his office. Trevor was out. I thought it was fine to go in." She told me the rest of it carefully, and without dramatic emphasis, the way people sometimes describe the worst things that have happened to them in the flattest possible voice, as though the flatness is the only container they trust to hold it without spilling. She opened the door to Trevor's office. Diane was inside. So was Trevor. They were standing very close together near the window, speaking in low voices, and the quality of their closeness was not the closeness of a stepmother-in-law and her daughter's husband discussing household arrangements. It was something else entirely. Emily understood it the way you understand certain things, not through reasoning, but through the part of you that is older than reasoning and does not need it. She stood in the doorway. She could not move. Her hand was still on the doorknob. Trevor looked up first. His expression did not change the way a guilty person's expression changes. It simply closed the way a door closes, quiet and final. Diane turned around slowly, and what Emily saw on her face was not embarrassment. It was not surprise. It was calculation. The rapid, cold assessment of a person measuring a threat and deciding how to neutralize it. "It's Emily Cuckin," Diane said, and her voice was perfectly level. "Come in and close the door, please." Emily came in. She closed the door. Cody was in the next room watching a cartoon. She could hear the television through the wall. Diane crossed the room and stood close enough that Emily could smell her perfume. "You love your father," Diane said. It was not a question. "You know how much he has been through. You know how hard these last 2 years have been for him. You have seen him start to come back to himself, to smile again, to sleep through the night." She tilted her head slightly. "Now I want you to think very carefully about what it would do to him if you walked out of this room and told him what you think you just saw." Emily told me her throat closed completely at that point. She wanted to speak and could not find the air for it. "Your father is 65 years old," Diane continued. "He has a heart that has already been broken once. You saw what losing your mother did to him. Can you honestly tell me you want to be the person who does that to him again? Can you look me in the eye and tell me that what you want right now is to walk out that door and destroy everything he has finally managed to rebuild?" Trevor said nothing throughout this. He stood by the window with his arms at his sides and watched, and his silence was its own kind of threat. The threat of a man who has already decided that whatever happens in this room will be handled by someone else, and that he will emerge from it untouched, regardless. Emily told me she thought about Cody. She thought about the custody threat Trevor had already made. She thought about the job she no longer had, the friends who were no longer calling the letter that had never reached me. She thought about the fact that she was standing in a room with 2 people who had been planning this for longer than she had known either of them, and that she had nothing. No proof, no witness, no ally within reach. So she nodded. She said she understood. She walked out of the room and closed the door behind her, and went into the next room and sat on the floor next to Cody and watched the cartoon with him for 20 minutes without hearing a single word of it. "I am so sorry," I said when she finished. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Emily, I am so sorry that you were in that room alone." She set down the knife and turned to face me. Her eyes were dry, but her jaw was tight in a way that told me what the dry eyes were costing her. "I want you to understand something, Dad," she said. "I did not stay silent because I was weak. I stayed silent because I was afraid of breaking you. And I think that was the most sophisticated thing they did. They made me afraid of the very person who could have helped me." Cody looked up from his envelope. "Mommy, look," he said, holding up a drawing of something with 6 wheels. "That one is a fire truck." Emily looked at her son for a moment. Then she smiled at him, and it was the most real smile I had seen on her face in longer than I could remember. "That is a beautiful fire truck, baby," she said. She picked up the knife and went back to the carrots. I stood at the stove and stirred something that did not need stirring, and neither of us spoke for a while. And the kitchen held us both in its warmth, while Cody narrated the continuing adventures of his fleet of envelope trucks behind us. Marcus came to my study on a Tuesday morning in late August with a manila folder, and the expression he wore when he had something to tell me that he did not enjoy having to tell me. I had come to recognize that expression over 12 years. It was not alarm exactly. Marcus Webb did not alarm easily. It was more like the careful stillness of a man who has already processed something difficult and is now waiting for you to catch up. He sat across from my desk and placed the folder between us without opening it, and I understood from that small gesture that whatever was inside it, he wanted me to be the one to open it. I opened it. There were 4 photographs printed on standard copy paper, time-stamped in the lower right corner from the estate's security system. The first showed the main gate at 11:47 on a Wednesday night in late July. A dark blue sedan was parked just outside, engine running, headlights off. The second showed the side entrance to the main house at 11:53 the same night. A man I did not recognize was coming through the door carrying a leather briefcase. The third showed the hallway outside my private document room at 11:58. The same man outside the door. The fourth showed the same hallway at 12:21 in the morning. The man was gone. The door was closed. In his left hand, visible at the edge of the frame, was a thick manila envelope that had not been in his hands in the previous photograph. I looked at the 4 photographs for a long time. Then I looked at Marcus. "Who let him in?" I asked. "Sakturtu." "Trevor Holloway," Marcus said. I have footage of Trevor at the side entrance at 11:45, 2 minutes before the vehicle arrived. He waited by the door and let the man in personally. He also let him out at 12:23. Marcus paused. "Trevor has a key to the side entrance. You gave it to him 2 years ago when he and Emily were staying here during the renovation of their house. I had forgotten about that key." I felt the particular coldness of realizing that something you did out of ordinary generosity had been quietly filed away and used against you. "Do you know who the man is?" I asked. "I ran the plate on the sedan," Marcus said. "The vehicle is registered to a private firm in Brentwood called Holloway Consulting, LLC. I looked into the business registration. It was incorporated 8 months ago. The listed principal is Trevor Holloway." Marcus folded his hands on the desk. "The man in the photographs appears on the firm's website as a contracted legal advisor." I sat back in my chair. "Trevor has his own consulting company. Incorporated 8 months ago," Marcus repeated, "with a legal advisor on retainer." I want to explain what this meant in practical terms, because it took me a few minutes to work through it myself. Under American law, a person can transfer ownership or control of a business through what is called an assignment of interest or a management transfer agreement. These are legitimate legal instruments used in business succession planning all the time. They require the signatures of the current owner, and depending on the structure of the business, possibly a board or a set of witnesses. They do not require a court. They do not require public filing in advance. If a person signs one of these documents without fully understanding its contents, they can legally transfer significant control of their business to another party, and unwinding that transfer afterward is expensive, slow, and not guaranteed to succeed. Trevor had a lawyer. Trevor had a company. Trevor had a key to my house and access to my document room. And in 3 months I was planning to marry his accomplice. "Marcus," I said, "I need to know if anything was removed from that room." "I have been through it," Marcus said. "As far as I can determine, nothing is missing. However, several files were moved. The folders containing the original articles of incorporation for Harlan Holdings and the most recent operating agreement were not in their usual positions. I replaced them and noted the discrepancy." He reached into the folder and produced a second sheet, a handwritten log of every file that had been disturbed with the original position and the position he found it in, noted in his precise economical handwriting. I took the sheet and held it, and thought about Trevor Holloway in my document room at midnight, with a lawyer I had never met going through the paperwork that represented 40 years of my life's work. I thought about what he had been planning to ask me to sign, and when and under what circumstances, and how easy it would have been to hand a man a document in a moment of celebration and trust. "Has he been back?" I asked. Not to the document room," Marcus said. "He has made 3 calls from the estate landline to the Brentwood number in the past 6 weeks." I noted the times and durations. He produced a third sheet. I looked at it. The calls were short, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 4 minutes. Progress reports, most likely. Everything on schedule, everything proceeding as planned. I closed the folder and set it on the edge of my desk and looked out the window at the August heat shimmering above the garden. The roses Margaret had planted along the south wall were still blooming deep red and heavy-headed in the late summer warmth, the way they bloomed every year, regardless of what was happening inside the house. "Write everything up," I told Marcus. "Every photograph, every plate number, every call log, every file that was touched. I want a complete record dated and signed." Marcus stood. "Yes, sir." "And Marcus." He stopped at the door. "Thank you for watching." He looked at me for a moment with that steady, unreadable expression of his. "That is what I am here for, Mr. Harlan," he said. He walked out, and I sat alone with the folder and the roses and the knowledge that the man eating dinner at my table 3 nights a week had been in my document room at midnight, preparing to take everything I had ever built. Peter Walsh has been my closest friend for 30 years. We met at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in 1994 when I was 41, and he was 44, and we were both newer to Nashville than we liked to admit. He was building his family practice on the west side of town, and I was in the middle of the second expansion of Harlan Holdings, and we ended up at the same table and discovered we had grown up in neighboring counties and had independently developed the same opinion about a particular brand of Tennessee bourbon. We had been friends ever since in the easy, undemonstrative way of men who do not need to see each other every week to know the friendship is solid. Peter became the Harlan family doctor the year Emily turned 12. He had delivered the news of Margaret's diagnosis in his office on a Thursday afternoon, sitting across from us with the file open in front of him, and his hands very still, telling us the truth, clearly and completely, because he understood that we were the kind of people who needed the truth, clearly and completely, even when it was the worst possible truth. I had trusted him with every hard thing since, so when Peter called me on a Sunday evening in late September and asked in the careful voice he used for careful things whether I was happy with how things were at home right now, I understood that the question was not the question. "Peter," I said, "what did you see?" He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, working through something. "Shia, Emily came in for her annual physical last Tuesday," he said. "Trevor brought her and waited outside, which is standard, but she seemed careful. More careful than I have ever seen her, like someone watching a door." He paused again. "When I examined her wrist during the cardiovascular portion of the exam, there was bruising. Recent, I would say, within the week. She said she had caught it on a cabinet door in the kitchen." My hand tightened on the phone. "And you believed her?" "No," Peter said without hesitation. "I did not. But she looked at me with a very particular expression, George. The expression of someone who is asking you without words to please not push this right now. To please trust that she has a reason for asking you to let it go." He exhaled slowly. "I have been a doctor for 35 years. I know that expression. I also know that under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, what most people call HIPAA, I am legally bound to protect a patient's medical information and cannot disclose it without their consent even to family members, unless I determine the patient is in immediate danger. Emily was not in immediate danger in my examination room. She was frightened, and there is a difference. I understood what he was telling me. American medical privacy law is designed to protect patients, and that protection does not bend because a worried father wants information. Peter could not have told me what he saw without Emily's permission. He was telling me now this way in this conversation because Emily had subsequently given him that permission. She had called him herself the week after the examination and told him she wanted him to know everything and to tell me when the time was right. "She called you," I said. "2 weeks after the appointment," Peter said. "She told me what had been happening. All of it. She also told me she had started to believe that things were going to come to a head around the wedding, and that she wanted me to be prepared to speak to what I had observed professionally and on record if it became necessary." Another pause. "George, she was protecting you. Even then she was thinking about how to protect you." I sat down on the edge of my bed. Outside the window, the September dark had come down thick and warm over Nashville, and somewhere in the neighborhood, a screen door was banging open and closed in the breeze. The particular sound of a southern evening settling into itself, and I sat there with the phone against my ear and felt something shift in my chest that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "How is she?" I asked. "Honestly, she is stronger than Trevor gave her credit for," Peter said. "That is not a medical assessment. That is 30 years of knowing your family." He let that land for a moment. "She is going to need time, George. And she is going to need her father to stop apologizing and start being present. Those are two different things." I almost said I was sorry. I stopped myself. "What do I do now?" I asked instead. "You already know what to do," Peter said. "You have known since Cody came to you this morning. You are calling me because you want someone to tell you that you are not wrong for what you are thinking." He let the silence sit between us for exactly as long as it needed to. "You are not wrong, George. You have never been more right about anything." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time. I thought about Emily at 12 years old, sitting in Peter's waiting room with a book in her lap, swinging her feet, because she was too small to reach the floor. I thought about Margaret holding my hand in that same office while Peter told us the diagnosis, her grip steady, even while mine was not. I thought about what it meant to have people in your life who told you the truth when the truth was hard, and how rare that was, and how much I had taken it for granted. Then I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I went downstairs and found Diane in the living room, and I smiled at her, and she smiled back, and neither of us knew yet that the conversation I had just had on the other end of that phone had changed everything that was going to happen in this house. She poured me a glass of wine. I accepted it. I sat beside her and made conversation about the wedding arrangements, and I was in that hour the finest actor I have ever been in my life. I announced the wedding on the last Saturday of September. Diane had suggested a small dinner at the estate, close family, and a few longtime friends. Nothing formal, just the people who mattered most. I had agreed, because it seemed right, and because at that point, I was still performing the role of a man who had not yet seen behind the curtain. I had learned in the weeks since Peter's phone call that performance required attention. Every smile had to land at the right moment. Every question had to sound like genuine curiosity rather than investigation. I was 65 years old, and I had never worked harder at anything in my life than I worked at appearing to be exactly who Diane and Trevor believed I still was. The dining room at Harlan Estate held 22 people comfortably that evening. Candles on the table, the good china that had been Margaret's mother's, a Tennessee autumn pressing itself against the tall windows in shades of amber and rust. Bobby sat at the far end of the table with Sarah beside him, which I had arranged deliberately. Marcus was not at the dinner, he was never at family dinners, but I knew he was in the security office because I had asked him to be. I stood at the head of the table and said what a man is supposed to say at these occasions, that I had not expected to find happiness again, that Diane had reminded me what it felt like to look forward to a morning, that I was grateful to everyone in that room for standing beside me through the hardest years of my life. I said all of it, and I meant pieces of it, and the pieces I did not mean I delivered with the conviction of a man who had spent 40 years negotiating contracts and understood that sometimes the words you say are less important than the confidence with which you say them, Diane cried. Beautifully briefly, one hand pressed against her collarbone. Several people at the table wiped their eyes. Bobby watched me from the far end with an expression that only a brother could read, and what it said was, "I know exactly what you are doing, and I am right here." Emily was seated to my left. She had come because I asked her to come, and she had brought Cody, who had fallen asleep on a blanket in the corner of the room before the main course arrived, one arm thrown over his face in the boneless way of sleeping children. Emily ate slowly and said the right things to the people on either side of her, and she smiled when the table was watching. And every time the table was not watching, she looked exactly like what she was. A woman holding herself together through sheer force of will. Trevor waited until the dessert course. I had expected him to. Men like Trevor are patient about time, because timing is one of the few things they actually understand. He came to stand beside me at the sideboard while I was pouring coffee, close enough that the conversation was private, far enough that it looked casual. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, in the way he had always done, the gesture of a son-in-law performing warmth, and he said in a voice pitched just below the general noise of the room, "George, I have been wanting to talk to you about Emily." I kept my face easy. "What about her?" "I am worried," he said. He picked up his coffee cup and held it with both hands, the picture of a concerned husband. "She has been struggling more than she lets on. I do not think she is sleeping. She gets emotional sometimes in ways that concern me. I love her, and I do not want to speak out of school, but I think she may need some professional support." He paused precisely long enough to let that land. "I just want to make sure you are not counting on her too heavily right now. For any kind of responsibility. Major decisions. That kind of thing." I looked at him for a moment. Trevor Holloway in his good suit, holding his coffee with both hands, his face arranged into the expression of a man whose heart was heavy with concern for his wife. Everything about him was surfaces. Everything about him was performance. And he was good at it. I could see how good he was at it now that I was watching from the other side. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "I will keep that in mind." He nodded, squeezed my shoulder once, and went back to his seat. I stood at the sideboard for a moment longer, looking out at the table. Diane was laughing at something the woman beside her had said. Bobby was watching Trevor walk back to his chair with an expression I recognized, because it was close to the one I was working to keep off my own face. I picked up my coffee and went to Emily. I sat down in the empty chair beside her and leaned close. "Hey, sweetheart," I said quietly. "How are you holding up?" She turned to look at me, and her eyes went briefly to Trevor across the table, and then back to me. She had heard nothing of our conversation at the sideboard. She did not know I had just listened to her husband suggest as gently and plausibly as possible that she was not mentally stable. "I am fine, Dad," she said in the careful voice she used when she was not fine. "I am happy for you." I put my hand over hers on the table the same way I had done in the library. and I held on, and I said low enough that only she could hear, "Emily, look at me." She looked at me, her green eyes. Margaret's eyes were very steady. "I see you," I said. "I need you to know that. Whatever you think I see or do not see, I see you. All of it. And I am not going anywhere." Something moved through her face that she could not entirely control. Her jaw tightened and her eyes went bright, and she pressed her lips together and breathed carefully through her nose the way she had done since she was a child, when she was determined not to cry in public. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Dad." Across the room, Bobby caught my eye. I gave him the smallest nod. He looked down at his plate. In the corner, Cody slept on his blanket with his arm across his face, dreaming whatever 3-year-olds dream, while the adults around him moved their pieces into position for the day that was now less than 7 weeks away. I could not sleep. That was not unusual in itself. I had not slept well since Margaret died, and in the 7 weeks since the engagement dinner, I had slept least of all lying awake in the dark, with the particular alertness of a man who is running a long and careful operation and cannot afford to miss anything. But this night was different. This was the 14th of November, and tomorrow morning everything that had been building for 2 years would either hold together or come apart, and there was nothing left to do but wait for the morning. I got up at 11. I put on my robe and walked down the back stairs and through the kitchen and down the service corridor to the security office because I knew that was where they would be. I had told Bobby 3 days earlier. Not everything I had given him the shape of it, the outline enough to understand what I needed from him tomorrow. Bobby had listened without interrupting, which was not his natural inclination, and when I finished, he had sat very still for a moment, and then said in a voice I had not heard from him since our father's funeral, "George, how long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "And you carried all of this yourself?" "I had Marcus," I said, "and Sarah." Bobby had looked at me for a long moment. Then he had reached across and gripped my forearm with both hands, the way our father used to do when he meant something seriously, and he said, "Whatever you need tomorrow, I am there." I had called Peter the same evening. Peter had asked 2 questions, received 2 answers, and said, "Tell me where to stand and when." That was the thing about people who had known you for decades. They did not need the whole story. They needed enough of it to know which direction to face. The security office was a small room behind the main garage with monitors along one wall and a metal desk that Marcus had used for 12 years. When I opened the door, all 4 of them were there. Sarah sat in the chair by the window with her notebook open in her lap. Bobby stood against the far wall with his arms crossed and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Peter was in the second chair at the desk, his jacket folded over the back. Marcus stood at the monitors which were showing the current feeds from the estate cameras, the chapel, the driveway, the garden, the main entrance. They all looked at me when I came through the door. "I thought you were sleeping," Bobby said. "I thought you were sleeping," I said. He almost smiled. Almost. I pulled a chair from the corner and sat down, and for the next 2 hours we went through everything. Sarah read from her notebook. Dates, times, observations going back 15 months. The incidents with Emily, the conversations she had overheard, the money she had tracked, in the bank statements she had photographed. Marcus walked me through the camera evidence, the midnight visit to the document room, the 11 gate appearances he had logged, the 3 phone calls to the Brentwood number. Peter spoke last quietly and precisely about what he had observed in his examination room in September, and what Emily had subsequently told him she wanted him to say on record if it became necessary. I listened to all of it laid out together in that small room and felt the full weight of it for the first time. Individually, each piece had been serious. Together, they were something else. Together, they were a portrait of two people who had spent nearly 2 years inside my home and my family, moving carefully and patiently toward a single objective, and who had come within one morning of achieving it. "What do you need from us tomorrow?" Marcus asked when we had finished going through everything. I told them. I went through it step by step, each person's role, each moment in the sequence. Marcus asked 2 clarifying questions about timing. Sarah asked one about the notebook, whether I wanted her to read from it directly or summarize. Bobby did not ask anything. He just listened with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the expression he had worn since we were boys, whenever he had decided that something needed to be dealt with, and he had appointed himself the person to deal with it. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Peter said, "George, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Go ahead," I said. "Are you all right?" He said it simply, without the clinical framing he sometimes used. Just one friend asking another. Not the plan. Not tomorrow. You. "Are you all right?" I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. I was not all right in the way that a man is all right when nothing has happened. But I was all right in the way that a man is all right when he knows exactly what he is doing and why, and has the people around him that he needs, and has made his peace with what the morning is going to require of him. "I am," I said. "I really am." Peter looked at me for a moment, and then nodded once the way he nodded when he believed something. I stood and thanked each of them. Sarah closed her notebook and held it against her chest. Bobby unfolded his arms and gripped my shoulder once hard without a word, which was his way of saying everything. Marcus turned back to his monitors. I walked back through the house alone. The estate was quiet around me, the flowers arranged in the chapel, the tables set, the candles waiting to be lit. Everything prepared for a ceremony that would not happen the way anyone in this house expected. In the kitchen on the counter was a drawing Cody had left from the afternoon. It was a picture of 4 people holding hands in a row drawn in green crayon. Underneath, in Emily's handwriting, were 4 names: Grandpa, Mommy, Cody, and one more in smaller letters that made me stand very still for a long moment: Margaret. I folded that drawing and put it in the inside pocket of my suit jacket against my chest. Then I went upstairs to wait for morning. I did not go to my bedroom. I went instead to my study, the room where I had worked for 30 years, where the desk still had the coffee ring from a mug Margaret had set down in 1997, and that I had never allowed anyone to sand out because it was hers and it belonged there. I sat in my chair, and I did not turn on the overhead light. I sat in the dark with the lamp on the desk, throwing a small gold circle onto the blotter, and I let myself feel everything I had been managing and measuring and carefully containing for the past several months. It was considerable. There is a particular kind of pain that comes not from what people do to you, but from what you allowed, however innocently, however unknowingly. I had let Diane into this house. I had opened the account. I had given Trevor the key. I had listened to his careful, concerned assessments of Emily's mental state and nodded and told him I would keep it in mind. And all the while, my daughter was in a house 20 minutes away, writing letters that never arrived, sitting on bathroom floors, watching her world narrow down to the width of what one calculating man decided to permit her. I pressed both hands flat on the desk and breathed. The drawing was still in my jacket pocket, hanging on the back of the chair. I took it out and unfolded it under the lamp. Cody's 4 figures in green crayon holding hands in a row. Grandpa, Mommy, Cody, Margaret. I looked at it for a long time. Cody had never met his great-grandmother. He knew her only from photographs, from the stories Emily told him, from the way adults spoke her name with a particular softness that even a 3-year-old could understand meant something important. And yet he had drawn her there in the row, holding hands with the rest of us. Because she belonged there. She had always belonged there. I thought about Margaret for a long time that night. Not with grief exactly, though grief was present. More with the particular quality of conversation you have with someone who is gone but not absent. I thought about what she would say if she were sitting in the chair across the desk from me right now, the way she used to sit when I brought problems home from work and needed to talk them through. She would not have been surprised. That was the first thing. Margaret had seen Trevor for what he was in one dinner. She had said so in her careful, oblique way, and I had deflected it, and she had let me because she understood that some lessons cannot be given, only learned. She would not have held that against me. She was never the kind of woman who said, "I told you so," not because she did not think it, but because she understood that the saying of it served the speaker and not the listener. What she would have said, I think, was this: "George, you already know what the right thing is. You have always known. The only question was whether you were going to let fear make the decision instead of you." I was not afraid of what was going to happen tomorrow. That surprised me a little, but it was true. I was not afraid of the confrontation, or the guests, or the awkwardness, or the aftermath, or any of the practical considerations that might have given a different man pause. What I had been afraid of for most of the past 2 years was something simpler and more fundamental. I had been afraid of being alone again, of going back to the silence of this house after Margaret, to the evenings with no one to talk to, and the mornings with nothing to look forward to, and the long, particular loneliness of a man who has loved well and lost it. Diane had offered an exit from that loneliness, and I had taken it because I was hungry for it, and I had not looked carefully enough at what the exit actually led to. But I was looking now. I reached into the desk drawer and took out the small framed photograph I kept there, Margaret and me on the front porch of the first house we had owned, 1987, Emily on Margaret's lap at age 4, all of us squinting into the sun and laughing at something Bobby had just said from behind the camera. I set it on the desk beside the lamp. Then I took out a piece of paper and wrote 3 things on it. 3 things I was going to make sure happened before the end of tomorrow. Not the plan. Marcus and Sarah and Bobby and Peter had the plan. These were personal, private. The things that mattered underneath the plan. Emily would hear the truth from me directly. Not through Sarah, not through Bobby, not through the events of the morning. From me, her father, before the day was over. Cody would never know the weight of what had been done around him. He would know only that his grandfather loved him and that his mother was safe. And Margaret's photograph was going back on the wall at the top of the stairs before the week was out. Right where it belonged. Right where it had always belonged. I folded the paper and put it in my jacket pocket beside the drawing. I sat for another hour in the quiet of the study, listening to the house breathe around me. At 4 in the morning, I heard a car on the long driveway, early delivery, probably flowers or catering. The wedding was real in the world outside this room, still moving forward on its own momentum. That was all right. I needed it to keep moving until I was ready to stop it. At 5:30, the sky outside the study window began to go from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before dawn in November, and I straightened in my chair and looked at the photograph on the desk one more time. "All right, Margaret," I said quietly, to the room, to the lamp, to whatever remained in a house of a person who had loved it for 30 years. "Let us finish this." I stood up. I took the drawing and the note from my jacket pocket and folded them together and put them back. I straightened my jacket. I walked to the door. Outside the window, the first birds of the morning had begun. The florists arrived at 6:45. I watched them from the study window, 3 women in green aprons unloading white roses from a van in the gray November dawn, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times and did not need to speak to coordinate. They knew where everything went. They had a plan. I understood the feeling. I had showered and dressed by 7. Charcoal suit, the one I had chosen 3 weeks ago for a wedding I had intended to be real. White pocket square. The tie Margaret had given me for my 60th birthday, dark blue with a small silver pattern that she had said made me look distinguished rather than old. I had not planned to wear it today. I put it on anyway. It seemed right to have something of hers close. By 8, the driveway was filling. Cars I recognized, cars I did not. 400 people had been invited, and the morning was clear and cold, the way Tennessee November mornings sometimes surprise you with their brightness, as if the season had decided to put on its best face for the occasion. I stood at the front door and greeted guests as they arrived, shaking hands, accepting embraces, saying the things a groom is supposed to say on his wedding morning. I was warm and unhurried, and completely present in the way that a man can be when he has spent the night making peace with what the day requires. Bobby arrived at 8:15. He came through the front door and gripped my hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires, looking at me steadily. And I looked back at him. And we did not need to say anything because we were brothers, and we had been reading each other since childhood, and what passed between us in that moment was sufficient. Marcus had been at his post since 6. I had seen him briefly in the corridor outside the security office when I came down, and he had given me a single nod that meant everything was in position and nothing had changed overnight. The 3 business partners I had quietly called Raymond Sutherland and 2 others Trevor had borrowed from without returning were on the guest list. I had spoken to each of them privately in the weeks prior. They had come not to cause a scene, but to bear witness because I had asked them to, and because they were men who understood that sometimes witnessing is the thing that is required of you. Sarah had taken her position near the chapel entrance by 8:30. She had her notebook in the inside pocket of her coat. She had told me the night before that she had reread every entry 3 times in the past week, that she was certain of every date and every detail, and that she was ready. I had thanked her again. She had told me to stop thanking her and go get dressed. The ceremony was scheduled for 10. At 9:40, I was standing near the chapel steps, speaking with a longtime business associate when I felt it. The same small pressure at the side of my hand that I had felt once before in this same hallway, on this same morning, in what felt like a different version of a life I was still living. I looked down. Chikitio. Cody stood at my side in his navy suit, smaller than any person had a right to be on a morning this important. His tie was slightly crooked, and his hair was already coming undone at one side, and he was holding Emily's tablet in both hands, with the careful grip of someone who understood, without being told, that what he was carrying mattered. He was holding something in both hands, extended toward me the way children offer things they consider important. It was Emily's tablet. The screen was dark, but I could see from the way he was holding it carefully, with both thumbs along the edges, that he understood it mattered. "Grandpa," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I made a video. By accident. But I think the people talking are talking about you." I crouched down to his level. Around us, guests continued moving toward the chapel, adjusting scarves against the November cold, greeting each other with the warm noise of a gathering that did not yet know it was something other than what it appeared to be. Somewhere behind us, the string quartet had begun the prelude music, the same piece I had chosen because Margaret had loved it. I took the tablet from Cody's hands. I did not look at the screen yet. I looked at my grandson, at his serious face and his careful eyes, and I thought about every version of this moment I had imagined since the night Peter called me in September. In none of those versions had I fully prepared myself for how small his hands were, how simply and completely he trusted me with the thing he was holding. "Thank you, buddy," I said. My voice came out steady. You did exactly the right thing. He nodded, satisfied in the decisive way of children who have been worried about something and are relieved to have it resolved. Then he looked past me toward the chapel with an expression of mild curiosity and said, "Grandpa, why are there so many chairs?" I almost laughed. I pressed my hand briefly to the top of his head instead. "Because a lot of people came to see something important happen today," I said. That was true. It simply was not the important thing any of them had come expecting to see. I straightened up and found Emily in the crowd near the garden entrance, standing slightly apart from the other guests in the pale morning light. She was watching me. She had seen Cody come to me, had seen me take the tablet, and her face had the expression of a woman who has been holding her breath for a very long time and is only now beginning to believe that it might be safe to exhale. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I gave her the smallest nod. She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth. Then she straightened her shoulders, and the expression that replaced the one before it was something I had not seen on my daughter's face in longer than I could name. It was not relief exactly, though relief was in it. It was something older and simpler than relief. It was trust. She was trusting me. Finally, completely the way she had when she was small and the world had not yet taught her to be careful about it. I turned toward the chapel. Marcus was at the door. I caught his eye and gave him the signal we had agreed on the night before, a slight turn of my right hand, at my side barely visible. He gave me one nod in return and reached for his radio. The cello began the opening notes of the prelude. 400 people settled into their seats. I walked through the chapel doors, with my shoulders straight and the tablet in my hand and the drawing in my chest pocket, and 38 years of marriage to a woman who had taught me what it meant to do the right thing even when it cost something. I was ready. Before I reveal the truth in front of all 400 guests, comment "Justice" down below, so I know you're still here with me. And a quick reminder, the upcoming sequence contains fictionalized elements created for dramatic effect. If you prefer strictly non-fictional content, feel free to pause or step away right here. I have stood in front of hundreds of rooms in my life. Boardrooms where contracts worth tens of millions of dollars waited for my signature. Auditoriums where I addressed employees during the years when the company was struggling and everyone needed to hear that we were going to be all right. Hospital waiting rooms where I delivered news that no one wanted to receive. I have stood in front of rooms and chosen my words carefully and watched those words land on people and change things. That is something I learned to do over 65 years, and I had believed until this morning that I understood what it felt like to stand somewhere and know that what you are about to say will not be forgotten. I had not understood it, not until now. The chapel at Harlan Estate was full in the way that only happens when an occasion carries genuine weight. Not the polished weight of a social obligation, but the real weight of people who love someone and have come a long distance to show it. 400 faces looked toward me from the white-draped rows of chairs, and every one of those faces expected to watch a man get married. I had asked the officiant to step aside 2 minutes before I walked in. He was a good man, and he had looked at me with the careful expression of someone who suspects something, but has decided it is not his place to ask. I appreciated that. I told him I needed a few minutes to speak before the ceremony. He nodded and moved to the wall. The musicians finished the last notes of the prelude. The chapel settled into a waiting silence. Diane stood at the side entrance in her ivory dress, holding white roses positioned to begin her walk down the aisle. From where I stood at the altar, I could see the precise arrangement of her smile, the particular warmth she had constructed over 2 years and deployed with the consistency of someone who had practiced it until it felt natural. Beside her, a guest said something, and she laughed, and the laugh was beautiful, and it meant nothing at all. Trevor sat in the front row to my right, one arm resting along the back of the neighboring chair. His suit immaculate, his expression the comfortable ease of a man who believes the hard part is already done. I looked at Marcus at the back of the room. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on mine, waiting for the signal we had agreed on in the security office 14 hours earlier. I gave it to him, a slight movement of my right hand, barely visible to anyone who was not specifically watching for it. Marcus raised the remote control and pressed a single button. The large screen behind the altar came to life. The video lasted 43 seconds. I watched the faces in the congregation as it played, rather than watching the screen, because I had already seen it, and I needed to see what it did to a room full of people who had not. I watched the confusion in the first 10 seconds give way to concentration as people leaned forward to hear more clearly. I watched the concentration become understanding. I watched understanding become something harder and colder as Trevor's voice came through the speakers, describing in the casual tone of a man discussing a business transaction exactly how he intended to ensure that I signed documents I had not read at a reception I would not leave until the ink was dry. Diane's voice followed, measured and certain, explaining that managing Emily through the first few weeks would be straightforward. Now that Emily had been so thoroughly isolated from anyone who might encourage her to speak. By the time the screen went dark, the chapel was so quiet, I could hear the November wind moving against the stained glass on the east wall. I let the silence hold for 10 full seconds. Then I said, "Sarah." Sarah Briggs had been standing at the side door with her notebook open since before the guests were seated. She walked to the front of the chapel with the unhurried composure of a woman who had been waiting 15 months for this moment and was not going to rush it now that it had arrived. She looked out at 400 people, and she began to read. She read for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I know because I counted. She read dates and precise times and exact amounts withdrawn from the joint account in increments carefully calibrated to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. She read the names of the 17 objects removed from Harlan Estate and the dates on which they disappeared. She read verbatim the conversations she had recorded in her small Navy notebook, Diane questioning Emily about insurance beneficiaries, Diane mapping the estate's financial structure through innocent-seeming conversations with household staff, Diane telling a contractor that after the wedding approval for any expenditure over $5,000 would route through her directly. She read all of it in the voice of a woman who had carried it alone for more than a year, and her voice did not waver once. When she closed the notebook and stepped back, I said, "Peter." Dr. Peter Walsh rose from the front row. He was 67 years old, and he had the bearing of a man who had delivered difficult truths in careful language for 3 decades, and understood that clarity in those moments was its own form of kindness. He introduced himself to the congregation. He explained his relationship to the Harlan family. He stated that his patient had authorized him in writing to disclose what he was about to disclose, because under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, a physician may only share a patient's medical information with that patient's explicit consent. And Emily had given that consent 2 weeks after her September appointment, because she had decided that the truth deserved a witness. Peter described what he had observed. He used plain words. He did not editorialize or exaggerate. He simply described what a trained physician sees when he examines a patient who is frightened and has been frightened for a long time, and what that pattern of evidence suggests about the conditions that produced it. He spoke for 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Every person in that chapel understood exactly what he was saying. Bobby opened the side door. Emily walked in. She was wearing a gray sweater and dark jeans. Her hair was pulled back simply the way she wore it at home on ordinary mornings. She had not dressed for a performance or a confrontation. She had dressed like herself because herself was what she had come to reclaim. She walked down the side aisle with her chin level and her shoulders back, and she did not look at Diane, and she did not look at Trevor. She looked at me. I reached out my hand. She took it. Her grip was hard and certain and warm, and I held on with everything I had, and she held on back. And the two of us stood at the front of that chapel, in front of 400 people, and we did not need to say a single word, because the room had already said everything. Trevor stood from his chair. His face had changed in a way I had not seen before. The surface of it, the smooth and practiced surface, had simply given way, the way a wall gives way when the structure behind it fails. He moved toward the side door with the speed of a man abandoning a position, and he stopped because Raymond Sutherland was standing in the aisle with his arms at his sides and his eyes steady. And beside Raymond were the other two men Trevor had borrowed from without returning. And beside them stood two attorneys from a Nashville firm who had arrived through the side entrance 20 minutes earlier and who were holding paperwork that Trevor Holloway was legally required to address. Trevor looked at Raymond. He looked at the attorneys. He looked finally at me. I held my daughter's hand, and I looked back at him, and I did not feel anger in that moment. What I felt was something quieter and more complete than anger. The particular stillness of a man who has done what needed to be done and can now simply stand in the fact of it. Diane had not moved from the side entrance. She was still holding her bouquet of white roses, and then she was not, because she set it down on the nearest chair with a gentleness that was the last performance she had left in her. She stood in her ivory dress in front of 400 people, and the face she had maintained for 2 years, warm, considered, precisely calibrated, was gone. What was underneath it was nothing I recognized. It was simply absence. The face of someone who had built an entire self out of strategy and found, when the strategy collapsed, that there was nothing beneath it that belonged to her. Emily's hand tightened in mine. Outside the chapel windows, the November light moved across the floor in long gold bars, steady and indifferent and beautiful, the way light has always moved through this room, regardless of what the people inside it were doing, regardless of what they had done or failed to do or chosen at the last possible moment to set right. I looked at my daughter standing beside me. She looked back at me with her mother's eyes. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Diane and Trevor left Harlan Estate at 11:47 that morning. I know the exact time because Marcus logged it, the way Marcus logged everything in the precise and habitual record-keeping of a man who understood that details matter most after the fact. They left through the side entrance, not the front door, which I had not specifically arranged, but which seemed appropriate. The front door of this house had been built for people who belonged in it. The guests took longer. Some left quickly with the slightly dazed quality of people who had witnessed something they had not prepared for and needed time alone to process it. Others stayed, coming to find me in small groups of 2 and 3, pressing my hand or my shoulder, saying the things that decent people say when they want you to know they are on your side without making it about themselves. I thanked each of them. I meant it each time. Bobby stayed. Peter stayed. Sarah moved through the house, directing the caterers and florists with the quiet authority of a woman returning to her natural state after a long interruption. By 1 in the afternoon, most of the wedding arrangements had been dismantled or redirected. The food that had been prepared for 400 people was loaded into the catering vans and driven at my request to 3 different shelters in Nashville. The white roses stayed. I saw no reason to move them. They were good roses and they had done nothing wrong. I found Emily in the garden at 2 o'clock. She was sitting on the stone bench near the rose wall, the one Margaret had chosen herself and had placed specifically so that it caught the afternoon sun in November. Emily had her coat pulled close and her hands around a cup of tea that Sarah must have brought her, and she was looking at the roses with the expression of someone who has put down something heavy and is still getting used to the feeling of empty hands. I sat beside her without speaking at first. The garden was quiet around us the way gardens go quiet in late autumn when the work of the season is done, and everything is waiting for what comes next. A cardinal landed on the top of the rose wall, looked at us with the bright, indifferent eye of a bird that has no opinion about human difficulties, and flew away. "How are you feeling?" I asked. Emily considered the question seriously, the way she had always considered questions as a child, as though every question deserved a genuine answer rather than an automatic one. "Like I have been holding my breath for 2 years," she said, "and I just now remembered how to breathe normally." She turned to look at me. "How are you?" "Ask me in a week," I said. "Right now I am still in the part where I am just glad it is over." She nodded. She understood that. We sat for a while in the November afternoon, two people who had been through something together and were on the other side of it, and did not yet have the distance to see it whole. Then Emily said, "Dad, I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it without interrupting." "All right," I said. "I am sorry I did not find a way to tell you sooner. I know you understand why I could not. I know you have said it was not my fault. But I need to say it anyway because it is true, and I have been carrying it, and I want to put it down." She paused. "I am sorry. I should have found a way." I waited until I was sure she was finished. Then I said, "Emily, look at me." She looked at me. "You protected your son," I said. "Every single day in impossible circumstances, you protected Cody. That is what I see when I look at what you did. Not the silence, the protection." I put my hand over hers on the bench. "Your mother would have seen the same thing. I know that without any doubt." Emily's jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright, and she looked away out at the roses and breathed carefully for a moment. Then she looked back at me and said in a voice that was rough at the edges but steady at the core, "She would have figured it out in about a week and a half." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine and surprises you. "She would have had the whole thing sorted by Thanksgiving," I agreed. Emily laughed too briefly, and then pressed her lips together and shook her head slowly, and there were tears on her face that she did not bother to wipe away. And I put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me, and we sat like that for a long time in the garden that Margaret had planted, and that still held in the particular way that tended things hold the character of the people who tended them, something of the woman who had loved it best. Cody found us at 3. He came running across the lawn in his navy suit, the jacket gone somewhere, the tie hanging loose, his dark hair thoroughly destroyed by whatever he had been doing for the past several hours. He was carrying something in one hand held out in front of him with the urgency of a child who has made a discovery of the first importance. It was a feather. Long gray and white, slightly bent at the tip. "Mommy, Grandpa, look," he said, arriving at the bench, breathless and triumphant. "I found a feather. It is from a very big bird." Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at the feather with the gravity it deserved. That is a very impressive feather," she said. "Can I keep it?" he asked me directly with the instinct children have for identifying the correct authority figure for any given request. "Absolutely," I said. He examined it for another moment with great satisfaction, then sat down on the grass at our feet and began conducting some private investigation of the feather that required his complete concentration. Emily watched him, and I watched her watching him, and neither of us said anything for a while, and the afternoon settled around the three of us in the particular way of late November in Tennessee, quiet and golden and slightly melancholy and entirely beautiful. That evening, after Cody had gone to sleep, in the room that had always been his at Harlan Estate, I went to the storage room at the back of the house. I found the box where Diane had put Margaret's things. Inside, wrapped in a dish towel, was the photograph from the top of the stairs. Margaret and I, on our wedding day, squinting into the afternoon sun. I carried it upstairs and hung it back in its place at the top of the staircase on the nail that had held it for 38 years. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I went to find Sarah, who was in the kitchen finishing the last of the day's work. I told her I wanted to talk to her about a change in her position at the estate effective immediately. She looked at me with the careful expression of a woman bracing for something she has not anticipated. I told her she was being promoted, head of household operations with full authority over every department on the property. I told her about the salary and the benefits and the renovated cottage on the east side of the grounds that had been sitting empty for 2 years. That was hers if she wanted it. I told her that this house had been lucky to have her for 20 years and that it was time the house made that clear in a way that was more than words. Sarah listened to all of it without speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the kitchen counter. Then she said, "Mrs. Margaret would have done this years ago." "Yes," I said. "She would have. I'm sorry it took me longer." Sarah nodded once, accepting that, and then she said, "I will take the cottage. I have always liked the east side of the property in the mornings." Later that night, I sat in my study with the lamp on and the house quiet around me, and wrote 3 words in the notebook I kept in the desk drawer. Not a plan, not a record, just 3 words for myself, for the version of me that would read them someday when the distance had made this whole year comprehensible. The 3 words were I was loved, not by Diane. I understood now that Diane had never loved me, not for a single day of the time I had known her, and that this was a fact I would need to sit with for longer than one evening before I could see it clearly. But before Diane, and underneath everything she had tried to build over and around and against it, there had been 40 years of a woman who had loved me completely, and a daughter who had protected her child rather than save herself, and a 3-year-old boy who had drawn his great-grandmother into a picture of a family holding hands because he understood without being told that she belonged there. I had been loved well, and I had loved well in return, and no amount of calculation or strategy or patient maneuvering could touch that. It had been there the whole time, solid beneath everything that had tried to replace it, the way a foundation is there beneath a house regardless of what someone builds on top of it. I closed the notebook. I turned off the lamp. Outside the study window, the Tennessee night was clear and cold and full of stars, and the estate was quiet. And upstairs, my grandson was sleeping. And down the hall, my daughter was sleeping, and at the top of the stairs, Margaret was back on the wall where she belonged. I sat in the dark for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. Then I went to bed. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept. I have told you this family story because I needed to tell it, and because I believe some truths only find their shape when spoken out loud. Here is what I learned. Loneliness is real. Grief is real. The hunger for comfort after loss is one of the most human things there is. But I let that hunger make decisions that my eyes and my heart should have made instead. Do not do what I did. Do not let the ache of an empty house convince you to stop looking carefully at who you let inside it. I am a grandfather who nearly lost everything, not to a stranger, but to people I fed at my own table. These grandpa stories do not always end the way you plan. But sometimes, if you are fortunate, a 3-year-old boy with his grandmother's eyes tells you the truth that everyone else was too afraid to say. And you get another chance. I believe God puts the right people in the right place at the right moment. Cody was mine. This is a family story about what love actually looks like, not the performed kind, but the kind that costs something and tells the truth anyway. These grandpa stories remind me every day that the people worth keeping are the ones who stay honest with you even when honesty is hard. If this family story moved, you leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And one small note, some stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely to explore meaningful life lessons. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings at all. There is something out there made just for you.